So I'm going to hand you, in a second, I'm going to hand you a piece of paper with some quotations on it. That's as far as I got, as far as like prepping something. Well, every time I sat down to like write notes I wanted this to be a conversation. And every time I sat down to write notes, I ended up like going into essay writing mode. So finally, I was just like, I'm just going to collect a bunch of quotations.
Are you trying to drag it?
I just want to see if anybody
there it
attended.
is. Yeah.
No.
You can leave it up there. You know? I mean, the whole thing is annoying. So, anyways. But so yeah, the name of this session is Writing Instruction as Public Service. As you guys know, I've talked about it in a meeting. I had this idea. I was calling it civic engagement. This idea for an initiative. Liberal Arts and Science is a Ryan Fellow initiative. It's kind of considering like what's the place of writing instruction across the disciplines as far as civic engagement goes. And I just started thinking about it more in terms of public service. And I guess the reason being, well, I just think it's more obvious why we should think of our work, why we should be able to justify our work in terms of public service than it is in terms of civic engagement. I think the reason is that, well, this is a public university, so we are de facto public servants. And I think it took me a while. I mean, when I first started, first place I taught was a private university. But I would say anybody working in higher education, it's largely a taxpayer-funded enterprise, even in a private university, because students are receiving government aid to be there usually. So I think just about pretty much all of higher education is a public service, but especially at a city. This is a state school, so we're state employees. And so I found, I don't know about you guys, but let me just start with the very basics. I guess I'm interested in this topic because I'm a big picture person, and I always like, for me to really get motivated in something, I always have to have some sense of like why it matters in the big picture. And sometimes that's a problem because sometimes you don't know until you start doing it why it matters. But yeah, that right from the beginning of my academic career in grad school as a TA, I used to really puzzle over that, like what good is this doing anybody? I mean, I knew what I liked about it. I liked reading books and writing about the books I read. I liked literature. I liked studying it. I liked talking about it. I liked writing about it. But I used to kind of feel like, okay, but other than me just having fun, like what's the point of this? And I think back then, and this probably had a lot to do with just how I was raised. And I think probably how most Americans are raised, how most Americans think about things. I just always thought of the individual student. All right, so what am I doing for the individual student? Okay, this is what they can get from this. But I think my work as a teacher started to become more fulfilling, and I started kind of having more sense of purpose and focus. Really when I was working on my dissertation, and I started kind of considering the socio-political aspects of writing pedagogy, and I started thinking about like how what we do is a public service. It's publicly funded, and therefore we should have some kind of answer to the question, like, what good is this? What's the social value of our work as college teachers in general, and for the purposes of this, writing teachers specifically. So I guess I just thought I'd say, I don't know, what in your responses to that, what's your own sense of like what we're trying to accomplish as writing teachers? And well, let's just start there. Like, and first of all, this is no judgment zone. Like, I'm not here to like, well, you don't care what I think anyways, but I'm not here to like, I'm not judging. You don't have to think like I do. I'm not going to be offended if you don't think like I do. But what do you? I'm just curious because I don't know if I've asked a teacher this in a long time. Like, what motivates you guys in your teaching?
Well, like I said earlier with Pat Clark, I love the idea of that the students we were all this way. We're all very bright. We're all very well educated, and were at the time for our level. But we all figured out, our thoughts all evolved, and they continue to evolve. And so the students are embarking on this. And I don't know if it's increasingly, but have had less and less opportunity to think for themselves, to find out what they really think. It might not jive with your classes or your perception. My perception is that a lot of times when you ask a student when I have them write their contrarian editorials, when they advocate a position that some people might disagree with, I really think that they're regurgitating a lot of the points and then the ideas that they have been told in the past. That's why I did 19 essays about how the advertising media gives women an unfair interpretation of femininity. Like and I don't care what their topics are or how they feel about them, what they think.
Just seems scripted.
They're not thinking. It is scripted. They're just trying to tell you what they think you want to hear, and they'll say that. They'll say, "No, I just tell my teacher what they want to hear. I just want to get a grade. I don't want any hassle."
And there's kind of, I'm sorry, there's kind of this like, I think there's, if you're a student who's not particularly enthused about your work in a writing class, there's this kind of already made argument that you've seen in a million places, and you can just kind of do it from memory.
Yeah, and so that's why I try to give them a better sense of their own critical faculties, because they're questioning their belief. They should be questioning their beliefs. They should be questioning their place in the world. This is university. So I don't teach them what to think. I teach them how to think. I try to get them to read and to understand a wide range of thought, because I don't know how much they are reading. So I try my best to engage them. I'll play devil's advocate in class, just to get them to think. And it's really nice to see the cognitive dissonance on their face when I say something that they've never, like make an opinion, obviously not a crazy one, that they've never heard before, because they haven't had their thoughts jostled, and that's why they get the cognitive dissonance.
Go off the script.
Right, and so I don't care what the students believe, as long as they can make a good case. It's my job in part to help them make a good argument, and I didn't say in the other meeting, but they should be able to argue both sides of an issue. What are the for abortion? I don't care how you feel if you're a student, but you should be able to articulate both sides of the argument without straw manning either.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes your own argument stronger.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel it is my job to get them to do. I see that as a kind of public service, because I am cognizant of the fact that I'm raising voters. I'm raising people, not raising. I'm teaching voters. I'm teaching people who go out in the community. I'm teaching people who will go to jobs and talk with other people. So they need to take possession of their own cognitive liberty.
So fostering critical thinking with a view toward creating kind of independent critical thinking citizens.
and the whole point, the angle that I don't think I personally take it, but I think that might appeal to you is that if a student is thinking critically in themselves, not without external nudging, if a student is thinking critically, is reading and absorbing information and doing thought, then then you should think that they'll agree with you, because your positions are considered and thoughtful, and you're a wise person. So that's it. So I tell the students sometimes, like, look, I don't care what you think. I will not grade you differently if I agree with you or disagree with you. I want to have rigorous, polite arguments. That's fantastic. Maybe if we see each other in a bar 10 years from now, maybe we'll argue with each, have a nice back and forth. But that's not my job here.
All right, what do you think, Stephanie?
Mine is mostly just that I want to help them understand that the things that they think about and the things that are meaningful to them or that matter to them are things that I want them to articulate, ideally in a good way. So like, my opinion is that a lot of my students come in because they haven't had the opportunity to think for themselves, because in grade school, a lot of their assignments are, well, let me help you teach to this test or like whatever, right? They haven't really had a lot of opportunities to explore their own brains, right? Or what they think about things. But at the same time, they come in with a very set, they've already decided what things matter to them and what things don't. Are they open to learning more? Yeah, definitely, right? But I think that they all come in feeling kind of strongly about at least one thing, right? Like and it's probably something that they themselves have experienced in their own personal lives, right? So I think my job is to help them figure out what is meaningful to them, help them realize that it can be meaningful to others, and then help them figure out how to express it.
It's interesting that you end on that word express, because as you were talking, I just kept on thinking about expressivism as a writing pedagogy that probably remember from Mike's class was kind of dominant writing pedagogy in the 70s. There was this idea, kind of the main thing that we should do is really listen to students, have faith that they do have something to say that matters, and really listen to them trying to say that, and just help them say it, whatever it is.
And as a kind of parallel, I'm sure you'll agree, because we both have creative writing in the face, and at Ohio State at least, I really loved how the teachers would say that their goal is to help you write the best version of whatever it is you want to write. One of my classmates loved writing retellings of fairy tales. So, okay, great. How do we judge this on the basis of what you're trying to do, and whatever that is? So that's kind of what I'm saying. We're trying to help them make the best argument for whatever version of themselves and their thoughts that they can.
Yeah. And I think too, like helping them, and I mean, part of this is coming because I'm still fresh off from the first year signature course that I taught last semester, which was only for incoming freshmen, and it was a spoken word thing. And they all came in and they were all like, we don't know if we have things to say, and like my only goal that semester was to like help them realize that like, no, like you do have things to say. And like, I don't know what those things are. You might not know what those things are, but like our job is to work together for you to figure out what those things are and to help you say those things, right? And like I think that that's like really my only job is to figure out what they want to say and then help them say it in a way that makes sense.
Classic expressivism. You are like totally expressivist. And I mean, I'm hearing Kim a little bit more echoes of what came on in the 80s, which was social constructionism. It's this idea that students think they're speaking for themselves, but they're not. They're speaking for the culture. The culture has kind of planted these. If I hear you right, there's kind of this cultural script.
I think because it's easy.
Yeah.
They hear, oh, my teacher wants me to write an opinion. My social studies teacher told me 10,000 times, blah,
Yeah.
X. So I'll just repeat X, and then I'll get my grade, and I can go to mud night.
But I don't want to get too much into that social constructionist expressivism debate, because that's not what this is about. We can talk about that for a long time. But I guess the social value of what you were talking about was a little bit more clear, because you're talking about people, you're talking about people actually voting, people going out and participating in the world. And it was important to you that they kind of articulate their individual stance on things, having considered different perspectives before they, or as they're doing that. So maybe like, let's fine tune this a little bit. If we're thinking about writing instruction as something that's publicly funded, and first of all, I want to say, I'm not challenging you on this. I think this absolutely can be done. But if somebody asks you, like, so taxpayers, what are we getting? How does you teaching students that they have something to say, how does that serve the public interest? What's that do? That does something for that individual student, but like, what's that do for the?
It's really the same exact value as public education, where we want to live in a society where people know basic arithmetic, where they have a basic understanding of the three branches of government. Like, that's why we teach school kids executive, legislative, judicial. We want to live in a society where as many people as possible have the baseline abilities that allow them to become, to get jobs, to function in society.
Okay. Well, I want to hear from Stephanie. So
I think it all boils down to the assignment that you give them. Because like, if I talk about, like, loosely helping students realize that like their words have value, right? And I just end it there, then I mean, you could say, okay, so like go buy all your students a journal and tell them to journal.
Yeah.
But how does that do anything for like the larger community?
Yeah.
It doesn't for the larger community, because journaling is a private act, right?
I'm not sure I agree with you on that, but continue.
Like, because all right, so the point I'm making is that if you give them an assignment that encourages them to engage with their surroundings or encourages them to go do something, then, and is structured in such a way that they have options, but it's still kind of like guided, right? Like, you have to do X, Y, and Z, like the podcast thing that I was doing. Like I partnered with local community organizations. I did it with the Smart Neighbors Project a few times. The whole project was kind of structured, right? So like last semester, our client was the city of Oswego, right? Like that was what the students were podcasting about. We broke the city of Oswego into 4 sections. It was, you could look at entertainment, downtown, maritime, or something else. But anyway, so they had to pick one of those 4 categories, and then they made a podcast episode that reflected their knowledge and interpretation of and value of the category that they chose. And I mean, really, like, the whole point of that project was for them to have a little bit of structure, but like, I mean, they can do whatever they wanted, right? So some kids really liked the movies as like just a thing that they liked, so they chose the Oswego movie theater, and then they created this thing, right, based on, and they realized that they had things to say about it, right? And now these podcasts all got they all went to the mayor's office, and they're going to be distributed like to people to help promote the city of Oswego.
Great.
So I think and that's just one example, right, of like an assignment, but I think that's where it starts. I think it starts with the assignment.
And it sounds like you found a way to like turn marry personal expression to social awareness, civic engagement.
But to build on what you said, though, I do agree that journaling in and of itself can be maybe less of a public act. However, especially in the time of cell phones, in which students are like the studies show that younger people are engaging in less self-reflection. Again, we want to live in a society where people are cognizant of themselves and their own thoughts, and have an inner dialogue and have a sense of understanding of themselves, because that helps that empowers them to make good decisions with their lives, which benefits the community. It helps them shape their understanding of politics and society based upon they grow empathy. If they are challenged to think about their emotions, they will start to think about others. So yes, it is obviously, yes, very politically, civically engaged to have them make podcasts about the city of Oswego, but just having a populace where people are not only educated about the basics, hopefully, but also have it. That's part of the overall intention of the university, is to create a self. You build yourself up for 4 years and transform yourself into something new based upon all of this thought you have done, reflecting on all you have learned. So I think that's an important facet too.
And I totally agree with you. I use that example largely just because Bob's question was structured in a way that made it sound like and I'm not like badgering your question, but like that made it sound like, well, what's like the value? Like if you think about, because like if you're a writing teacher explaining to a non-writing teacher the value of something like journaling, there's gonna be a little bit of a divide, right? Because not everybody would see the implicit value in something like. So I totally agree with everything you said. I just use that example because
I think it's a great example.
I feel like people are more apt to be dismissive of something like that.
I wanted to give you the opportunity to explain the social value of personal expressive writing. So now I want to take a look at these 5, I think, very thought-provoking quotes. And I don't know, I just kind of look back over scholarship I've done in the past, and I just pulled quotes that I thought really spoke to this issue of the place of college, higher education, and whenever I could find it, like writing instruction specifically, as far as the public good goes. So this first is John Dewey, both heard of him. This is from the School and Society from 1899. And Dewey, he's famous for being, he's famous for in a nutshell, he's one thing he's really known for is progressive education and the idea that we learn things by doing things, as opposed to like the 19th century model of like sitting at the desk and memorizing stuff. Progressive classrooms had kids up and about doing things and kind of take on their own projects and stuff like that. So this is him explaining the value of a pedagogical experiment at the laboratory school, which is a progressive school in Chicago, in which students learn by doing how changes in the arts or industries of sewing and weaving related to the evolution of the culture. He explains it, but like he had them just like start with, like students actually like started with like each of them had like a thing of wool, and they just experimented with different ways of processing that and basically turning that into clothes, sewing and weaving, and they were like, as they're doing that, they experimented with like different technologies so that had been invented for that purpose throughout the history of sewing and weaving. And the idea is like, the idea is not for them to learn how to sew and weave. The idea is for them to kind of think about how these changes in the technologies of how we do this thing we've always done reflect changes in the culture. So anyways, this is the quote. The world in which most of us live is a world in which everyone has a calling, an occupation, something to do. But the great thing for one is for the other is that each shall have had the education which enables him, and pardon the gender exclusive pronouns, but it was 1899. The great thing is that each shall have had the education which enables him to see within his daily work all there is in it of large and human significance. How many of the employed today are mere appendages of the machines they operate? This may be due in part to the machine itself or to the regime which lays so much stress upon the products of the machine. Interestingly, it kind of refers to industry as the regime. But it is certainly due in large part to the fact that the worker has had no opportunity to develop his imagination and his sympathetic insight as to the social and scientific values found in his work. So I chose this because sooner or later when you're talking about the social value of work, everybody goes there. Ken went there already. Jobs, That's what 99.9% of our students and 100% of their parents think that they're here to get the job. And so that's an argument so popular that we should take it seriously, whatever we think about it.
Well,
we should think about, I think, the implications of that. I think Dewey's inviting us to do that here. Is that students are going to go out and do something for a living. How can we best prepare them to do that? I think Dewey has a very different answer than most vocational-minded educators would have.
I have a slight modification. I agree with you. I'm not saying that.
I didn't say anything.
Well, no, I've never said that. Right, they're here to get jobs. The way I see it, we as one of the teachers that they will encounter, it's our job to help them become a person who deserves a job, who can get a job, not just for the job is. I mean, it's a necessity. But they have to build themselves into someone who deserves to get the job they want, and that's part of building the self. And that it's not just them filling a cog in a machine; it's them becoming the person they want to be, and of which money is a factor.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think you got to Dewey's concern. What do either of you think about it? Like, his concern is that workers are becoming, and this was common in the Industrial Revolution, people were worried that workers were becoming appendages of the machine they operate. Karl Marx had almost that same statement in the Communist Manifesto. So there's this idea that industrialized life was alienating people. These jobs that we're all preparing students for might kill their souls in short, and he's trying to offset that by giving them a context in which to see the job. It's kind of like your job is like a fishbowl, but the industry you work in tends to make you think that fishbowl is the ocean. I think Dewey's trying to give them a sense of what their work is the result of social, cultural processes. And to me, if you read more of the book, the idea behind that is so that they can they're not just so beholden. Their work isn't about the boss, They see their work in a broader context, in a broader social context, and therefore are less beholden to just like the boss and the paycheck and the bottom line. And his way of doing that is just to show them like an example of one industry and just have them learn by doing how changes in the culture translate into changes in the industry. In other words, that industry didn't just fall out of, that industry isn't a natural phenomenon, it's a man-made phenomenon. And therefore, I think the point is with Dewey, to keep reading him, that means we have agency. So you don't just go to work, you go to participate in something that is continually evolving. Whatever industry you join, whether it's academia or real estate or manufacturing, whatever, it's like that's an industry with or an enterprise with a history, and you don't just have to show up and do what they tell you. You can play an active role in the evolution of that thing.
I think
that's very different than just like prepare students for That's very different than job preparation.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The society has changed so much since Dewey. Our students, they're going to be driving Uber while, like going to night school for nurse. Like they have to have agency. It's no longer you start working at the factory and 40 years later you get a gold watch.
Yeah.
The things that they have to, what we need to prepare them for is a society in which by its very nature, they must be resourceful and have a sense of self and be able to, it looks like someone chimed in or something, and be able to adapt to different things. I'm reminded of, it seems that Dewey is prefiguring the Toyota way. During the 80s, Toyota, they started to give people, and a lot of the Japanese car companies would give people bonuses if they could figure out a way to streamline the assembly line, like giving them autonomous thought. Because look, if we do this in a certain way and it saves us time, the company benefits and we benefit. So by all means, suggest that we put a bucket of bolts in a different place. They empower the workers to have this kind of agency. And yeah, today, I mean, social influencers, like there's just so many different things that people are being called upon that it's really that they're much less of a cog in a machine. Literally, they are a cog in their own machine, I guess. I should write that down. Write that down.
Yeah.
Book title.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. This is from, it's called The Neglected R, The Need for a Writing Revolution. And this is a 2003 report by the National Commission on Writing for America's Family Schools and Colleges, which is a organization created by the College Board, which brings us the SAT. So I don't know. Already, I don't know how revolutionary the SAT is, but to me that already like raises my eyebrow a little bit. But this is it. When education was a private good, so here's this private-public issue. When education was a private good, it's accessible to fewer people, available to only a small elite in the United States, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, what we teach, were considered to be the foundation on which real learning and self-knowledge were built. That is to say, policy and pedagogy united around the proposition that how to say things correctly, how to say them well, and how to make sure what one said made sense were important educational values. To reap the full benefits of the great democratization of learning in the United States, these three elements should still be pillars of learning. So, Stephanie, what do you get out of it? This is from the SAT people. What do you think they're? It's a lot to take in right away.
It is. I don't know how I feel about the whole grammar, rhetoric, and logic were considered to be the foundation on which real learning and self-knowledge were built. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet, but I will say that the idea, like, I mean, how they've defined those three terms, right? Like how to say things correctly, which I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know, whatever. I'm going to ignore the grammar, rhetoric, and logic thing. But like the idea that you could say things, you could say them well, and you could make sure that what you have said makes sense, I agree with. I think that that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
hard not to agree with it.
I would say that that's something that like echoes my own teaching philosophy really, really strongly. I think the thing that I stumble over is the idea that what constitutes good grammar or acceptable grammar is something that is like really always changing, especially now, I think, because we have so many different ways of writing and communicating, right? That it's not always just about good grammar. But I will say like so that part I think I have problems with, but I agree with the statement.
Yeah, to me, this is a really like, it's almost like a Trojan horse. It comes off sounding all revolutionary and progressive, but it's actually very traditionalist, and I would even say kind of retrograde. Because it starts with because it's like rooted in this like nostalgia actually. They're talking about the democratization of learning, but at the same time, they seem to be saying since learning was democratized, education has gotten off track. So it's kind of like before to put this, what I hear this saying, and it's trying to sound like it's not saying this, is oh, we let all these poor people in and now everybody's stupid. You know? And what are we going to do about this? And to me, there's nothing democratic about that sentiment at all. Although I think it's very artfully rendered in a way that it's almost irresistible. You first read, when I first read that, I was like, yeah, this stuff's important. But then when you look at the historical context that it's addressing, it's kind of like, oh, is this, you're celebrating the democratization of higher education, but at the same time, you're kind of saying that before it was democratic, it was better. When only the elite were allowed in, it was better.
Well, it sounds like it's just saying that, so to some extent, higher education no longer correctly or no longer strongly enough prioritizes how to say things correctly, how to say them well, and how to make sure what one said makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for in whatever ways they're saying that when education was private, it was a Ferrari, and then when it became democratized, we turned it into a Buick.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should go back to giving, because now that we have the apparatus,
the people deserve a Ferrari.
The people deserve the Ferrari.
They would say. Yeah.
Right. So we should go back to, if you were a Harvard student in 1900, oh my God, have you seen those reading lists? So they're saying we should go back to that kind of thing for everyone, because now that we have this wonderful apparatus where whatever percentage of students from high schools go to college.
Yeah. Brings to mind that slogan from the Bush age with low expectation, or the soft bigotry of low expectation. People were saying, like, we need to be really democratic, we need to expect more from them.
No, expect less.
No.
That's
The people making that argument, the people accusing education of the soft bigotry of low expectations, were saying the truly democratic thing, it's great that we're offering that education will become accessible, but we need to make sure that what we're offering is a thing of value, and that means demanding more of our students. And that's a very valid argument and a tempting argument, but it does, I think the question it raises is hold on, like, is education something that the already powerful and prestige, that was my pocket, the already powerful and prestigious kind of own, and we're generously doling it out to the poor people in the working class now? Or is education something that we've invited previously excluded people, poor people, working class people, people of color, to join us in redefining? And I think that brings up this next. So in other words, who gets, and this is what Stephanie was getting at, who gets to say what, saying things correctly, saying them well, who gets to say what that means? And that leads me to this next one, which is from 1976 by this radical pedagogy guy, Richard Oman. This English in America, A Radical View of the Profession, 1976. The attitudes we encourage students to have toward language, toward order, correctness, tone, dialect, have been and still are an academic version of attitudes deeply held by those outside the academy. The exchange is reciprocal. The leaders of industrial society let English teachers know, indirectly to be sure, what kind of writing they want. And English teachers help teach the next generation of leaders what kind of writing to want. So the idea is, whether it's the, there's this, in Richard Oman's view, there's kind of this marriage between the academically elite with their traditional academic expectations and training, and the financially elite. There's this kind of marriage between them. They're the ones who get to decide what counts as correct, what counts as effective communication, what counts as order. And the people get left out of that conversation. So again, to go back to the idea of, like, is that serving the public, or is that serving to maintain the status quo? by which traditional academics rule the intellectual sphere, and already rich and powerful people work with them to maintain their positions of power and privilege. And students are just kind of taught to do what the already powerful and prestigious want them to do. So who has the power there, the people or the elite?
It seems, at least in context of the quote, by definition, isn't academia the way by which the process by which we determine, especially in science, is like the truth. How would that change if we democratize it? So if we get 10 random people in a room and ask them to determine the specific gravity of tin,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you democratize, to some extent, how do you democratize academia?
Empirical reality. How do you democratize empirical reality?
Yeah.
That's a valid point. In terms of like what the College Board was talking about, though, is like reading, writing, and rhetoric. I don't know that it's that we're dealing with those kind of objective empirical realities in our field.
Well, from the quote, it seemed to me like, yes, obviously, I already talked about how I want everyone to think and all of these beautiful, lofty, intellectual goals. But on the other hand, they need to be able to write an email to a boss that looks like a professional wrote it. There are these two. I love both, and both have a place, but both are also public concerns. Students need to be able to write a letter to the editor that doesn't look like, the Unabomber wrote it.
Well, and to connect to the point that you made, that's why I've been like thinking about this, because I really don't know how I feel about it. But to connect to that, like if you think about genre, right? So like if I think about this in creative writing and like poetry especially, because that's what I teach. If you think about how the exchange is reciprocal, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the way this is put about the leaders of industrial society let English teachers know what kind of writing they want. But I mean, if you look at what contemporary writers who are publishing are doing in their field,
there's nothing commercial about it at all.
Yeah, but like, I think that, I don't know, like if you're looking at that and then you're looking at, no, it's the end of a breakout, yeah. And then you I don't know, you think about kind of like what Ken said, right? Like if I'm teaching writers who want to publish and that's their goal, that's what they want to do, then it makes sense for me to show them what contemporary writers who are publishing are doing, right? Because I feel like it's almost a disservice for me to not show them.
Do it your way, and don't listen to anybody.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like I feel like, I don't know, but I don't necessarily, I suppose I disagree with the idea that it's like the leaders of the industrial society, I suppose, because I'm somebody who still believes that creative people are doing their creative things because they want to.
Mm-hmm. Especially with the changing technology. You can publish your novel today.
And I mean, and maybe it's naive to think, but I mean, like I'm teaching at the college level because I want to, right? I mean, like I could teach, or I could do something else, right? But I chose this profession. So I don't know. I don't know about this one.
We're running out of time, so I'm jumping into this next one. Now, this one I will say, this quote, when I came across this in this book, which is a great book, it really inspired me and stuck with me. This is Christopher Newfield, a few years ago, The Unmaking of the Public University, the 40-Year Assault on the Middle Class, from 2008. And he's reacting to like what he sees as the egalitarian vision in higher education in the 1960s. He's basically saying in the 60s we had this truly democratic, we're inviting people in en masse, and we had this truly democratic understanding of what we were doing. Basically, it's like we weren't just doling out to the people little bits of education. We were inviting them to recreate higher education with us. And I like this quote a lot. The public university was the institution where blue and white collar, children of both workers and managers, citizens of every racial background were being invited into a unified majority. As these normally opposed classes came together, they might outnumber and outthink traditional elites. In so doing, they could take over the leadership of society. Of course, this creation of a functional middle and working class majority never quite happened, but it was a future repeatedly foretold and imagined, analyzed and achieved here and there. Throughout this process, the public university was the new majority's principal workshop. So that's what Christopher Newfield was saying. This is what we had going in the 60s. Conservative forces came and turned education back into not the people's workshop anymore, but kind of this place where people came and learned how to do what the already rich and powerful wanted them to do, which is, and then that leads to this last quote. This is Sheila Slaughter and Gary Rhodes, Academic Capitalism, in the New Economy, Market, State, and Higher Education, 2004. And they're just talking about like the corporatization of higher education. They say, when students graduate, colleges and universities present them to employers as output, product, a contribution to the new economy. Student identities are flexible, defined and redefined by institutional market behaviors. So in their view, this idea that Newfield describes of higher education is something we're collaborating to make with the people, for the people, that's pretty much been totally demolished by corporatization, by a higher education system that's completely beholden to the invested class. I think that they're purely correct about that. and I'll just close by saying that's I would, when I'm thinking about writing instruction, higher education and writing instruction within higher education is public service. I'm looking for ways to kind of revisit that spirit of collaboration with the people, so where higher education doesn't just become like this thing that they're coming, like first generation students are trying to be initiated into. It has nothing to do with them, but we're inviting them to actually redefine the whole thing so that it works in the interest of the public. So it's in the public interest. All right, the end.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.